kind of treatment. A move to the coast, she said, might prolong his life, might save it. My father lowered his eyes toward his plate. He reminded my mother that Las Vegas was our home. You bring the booze, Kilberg said now. He put a licked finger to the air. It's about that time. Just some schnapps, I said. The liter of Bushmills I had borrowed in the past had been half empty, and tonight I had chosen a bottle of DeCooper Peachtree instead, paranoid that my father might have secretly taken to watching the volume of his whiskey. I had a hunch that Kilberg might declare the schnapps an unacceptable offering, but he only shrugged and said, "Whatever, man. Booze is booze." I held the sapling up to the light. Dark soil clung to a knot of roots. A shining worm writhed from the soil, twisting around like a periscope. I positioned the roots in the hole and scooped the dirt back in, patting it flat around the trunk. "There," I said. "What do you think?" Like the fort, the sapling leaned heavily to one side, in a way that made it look pathetic. "Just as I pictured it," he said. "This place looks better already. When that thing grows leaves, we'll have ourselves a little color out here." He kneaded his stump harder now, as though working a knotted muscle. "Well," he said, "what are you waiting for? Let's celebrate." I reached into my back pocket and brought around the bottle of schnapps, a pint. I handed it to Kilberg, and he uncapped it and sniffed the contents. He made a face, crinkling his nose, then caught himself and smiled. "Just what the doctor ordered," he said. "All we need now are some chicks, and we'd have a party on our hands." "Tell me about it," I said. He took a long pull, wincing as he lowered the bottle. Kilberg rarely discussed his health, and at the time I wasn't sure if having diabetes meant that he shouldn't be drinking. I had never seen him test his blood sugar or inject insulin, nor had I ever thought of his illness as life-threatening. He seemed, at any rate, to have a high tolerance for alcohol, or pretended to. Kilberg would do almost anything for attention. Just above the knee joint, his prosthetic leg opened into a kind of cup, and it was from here that he would drink my father's whiskey. Into the cup fit a concave socket, attached to which was a leather sleeve that laced up like a shoe. The sleeve slid snugly over the stump resting inside the padded socket. And when the laces were tied, the leg was supposed to remain attached. But if Kilberg took a clumsy step as we crossed the uneven terrain of the desert, the socket would come out, popping like a cork, and he would pitch forward into the dirt. What's more, the knee and ankle joints, crude-looking mechanisms that bent in accordance with a complicated arrangement of pins and bearings, creaked when he walked, and his stump itched and perspired and developed weekly blisters, causing him to grimace and complain. He moved with the lopsided gait of an arthritic old man. At school, kids tormented him, particularly Todd Sheehan and Chad Klein, two boys in our class who wore baseball caps and chewed tobacco. They were thuggish and athletic-looking, as big as Kilberg, and they called him Pegleg and Gimp, tripping him whenever they had the chance. Even so, I thought back then that there were other, smaller kids on whom Kilberg took out his frustration. "College chicks," he said, taking another pull. "That's what we really need." We were still in junior high school, and I wondered if Kilberg had ever even met a college-aged woman. "I'd go to UNLV for the chicks alone," he offered, "but my dad says college is for people who think they're too good to work." Kilberg was the son of a chemical plant operator, and he often found a way to incorporate his father's opinions into a conversation. He was determined to follow in the man's footsteps, to land himself a job someday at Kerr-McGee, where his father had worked for the past 20 years. Perhaps because my own father was an engineer, Kilberg needled me about being what he called a Richie, even though we lived in a small single-story house just up the block. Both our fathers worked in the desert, but the Kerr-McGee plant was only 20 minutes outside the city. The nuclear test site where my father worked was over an hour away. 3 years earlier, Kilberg's mother had run off with a gambler from Arizona, a man she'd met at a poker table. As a consequence, it occurs to me now, Kilberg liked to brag that he had the coolest father in the neighborhood, the smartest and the toughest. His father was tall and pot-bellied, and he glared at you with stony eyes, and when he spoke, his black beard parted to reveal a mouthful of crooked teeth, many of which overlapped or were angled to such a degree that you could see their rotting undersides. Evenings, he nursed a Heineken in his Barca-lounger until he fell asleep. Kilberg worshipped him, but on more than one occasion he had shown up for school with a fat lip, or a bruised cheekbone, or a cut above his eye. When I had asked Kilberg, the Monday after we had built the fort, why his wrist was black and blue, he told me that a stereo speaker had fallen on him, knocked over by Tarkanian, his German shepherd, but I suspected the injury had been punishment for the wood that had gone missing from his father's shed. Presently, Kilberg switched off the flashlight, slipping it into a pocket of his shorts. "Come on," he said. He handed me the bottle, scooting himself off the prosthetic leg and onto the ground, his real leg stretched out in front of him. Pushing with his hands, the same way we eased ourselves down the sloping banks of the arroyo, he inched across the dirt and into the fort. I crawled behind him to the low door frame. A green shag rug, taken from a supermarket dumpster, covered the hard dirt floor. Flashlights hung like inverted torches in each of the four corners, dangling upside down from shoestrings nailed to the plywood, one of the bulbs always faintly flickering. Brushing against a wall of the fort caused the flashlights to sway in their corners, yellow beams crisscrossing the rug as if it were a dance floor. Each month, Kilberg stole the latest issue of Playboy from the 7-Eleven near our school, and our only adornment was a glossy centerfold of Bernadette Peters, thumbtacked to the wall opposite the door frame. I took a sip of the schnapps, coughing as it burned down my throat. "There you go," he laughed. He took off his shoe, a white sneaker whose mate was outside, on the foot of the prosthetic leg. "We'll make a man out of you yet." Before long, I had a terrific buzz going. My head had grown numb, and I was loose-jointed, slurring my speech. The two of us lay flat on the rug. In the still air, I could smell sagebrush and Kilberg's cheap drugstore cologne. He kept saying, "You drunk yet? You feeling anything?" I pinched my eyes closed, and a kaleidoscope of color spun behind the lids. When I opened them, Kilberg was leaning over me, his breath warm on my face. "Get off," I said, squirming, but he held my arms. I couldn't get free, pinned by the stiff weight of his torso. I looked away. Through the doorframe, I could see the moon, white light in the black sky. When he put his lips to mine, I let out a grumble, doubtful of my sudden arousal, a tingling sensation that rained from the crown of my head to the tips of my fingers. I was confused, unsure of how to process what was happening, but he slipped his tongue into my mouth, and I found myself giving in to the kiss. He eased off me, touching my ears, my cheeks, the side of my neck. Then he forced his stump into my hip and gave a shudder when my erection brushed against his own. What we were doing seemed wrong, criminal maybe, but I started to feel energized, bold, the way I had felt when we had stolen the sapling from Eastern Avenue, the way I imagined Kilberg felt when he shoplifted Playboys from the 7-Eleven. I brought my arm up around his neck, but he batted it away. "Easy, lover boy," he said. He rolled off me, laughing. I thought, he mocked. "Relax, we're not fags, dude. It's only practice for the real thing, for when we both get girlfriends." Kilberg narrowed his eyes as if the answer to a troublesome question had finally dawned on him. "We're drunk, Nick. We're not thinking right. Don't ever tell anybody about this." He pulled his shoe back on, looking panicky. "You do when you're a dead man." So that's the first section of Arboretum. I've read from this book about 9 or 10 times now, I guess, in the past few months, and my wife has accompanied me a few times. And for the first few readings, I was explaining the rest of the stories after I'd read a section, and she took me aside and whispered that if I actually wanted to sell books, maybe I should stop doing that. So now I can tell you what happens. If you want to know, you can buy the book. Anyway, thanks for coming. Next up, we have Dessa.
Hello, how's it going? I just got back from a tour that ended in Omaha, and I was bitten by spiders. I think like maybe 30% of my body. So I like Omaha like a friend or cousin. I wrote a very brief collection, primarily of creative nonfiction stuff. So I'm going to read an essay from that, and then try some new stuff. The collection, in the interest of self-promotionalism, is called Spiral Bound. It is 4:23 in the morning. I am at the top of the beautiful, stupid staircase in my head. 3 months ago, during a trip to the dentist, I realized that I needed a staircase. I arrived late to the appointment, struggling to contain the contents of an overburdened manila file. I opened the door with my hip, while my right hand operated independently to check all the pockets in my body on a futile search for my cell phone. The receptionist kindly accepted my little bow of apology and waved me in. I go to a low-income clinic for artists where I seldom see the same dentist. This means that the Novocaine talk must be had anew on every visit. I looked into a pair of large brown eyes above a paper mask and said, I have a pretty incredible tolerance to Novocaine. This presentation is infinitely preferable to the converse formulation, I have a terrible sensitivity to pain. Well, I'll keep that in mind. But I didn't believe that this new dentist would keep that in mind. I believed that she had forgotten it already. I'm a relatively slender young woman, and so dentists are understandably reluctant to dose me as I'd like to be dosed, which is as an elk cab. The dentist began to prepare what I guessed to be a grossly inadequate shot of Novocaine. Partially reclined in her padded chair, I regarded a magazine page that she had taped to the ceiling. It featured a sandy sweep of ocean, a tropical dental getaway. But I do not like to pretend that I am in Mexico when I am receiving medical attention. The dentist administered my shot, the hygienist attended to her shining instruments, and we waited for my face to go numb. And sensing the opportunity, my mind immediately shot off. It flipped through the remembered contents of my calendar, called out approaching deadlines, then scrawled a hairy to-do list, whose items ticked past too quickly to read. My mind, which I used to consider a great ally, has turned into a sparrow on a leash. A crazy, ambitious, unblinking sparrow amped up on cocaine with red kaleidoscope eyes. It keeps me up at night. It talks over my phone calls. It strains towards the next task even before I'm finished eating, before I'm out of the shower, before I've properly greeted people or put the car in park. And more troubling, it seems to like me less and less. The dentist revved her drill. All right, let's give it a try. After 30 seconds of cautious drilling, I flinched beneath her. You're feeling me. Something cold or something sharp? I moved my hands. You're not sure. Okay, hang in there. She refilled her syringe and talked me through a series of injections. Now I'm going to walk the needle backwards a bit. Here, good. Okay, breathe for me. In the midst of the fourth shot, I wondered how much farther she'd have to sink the needle to get the sparrow. After a few sore minutes of waiting, we were able to continue, this time quite confidently. The dentist dispensed with her former delicacy and chatted with the hygienist as if they were alone in the room. The drill sent up little clouds of tooth dust. I felt the numbness advance unevenly across my face, the way that armies advance across a map of Europe. The numb took over the left side of my nose but could not bridge the septum. I felt it overtake the outer edge of my left eye, as though I was blinking someone else's lid. And it occurred to me that perhaps I had asked for too much Novocaine. That perhaps I was getting brain damage. But I couldn't drum up much concern, because I was painless. I wasn't